It's good to see you all here in your windowless monads and share this time this morning with you. This morning, if you've checked your email yet, you may have seen Kokyo Tapley sent us an amazing interview from the PBS series Amanpour and Company with David Kessler on he wrote The 6 Stages of Grief. And it's an excellent interview about acknowledging this deep heaviness. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling at times a deep heaviness as the impact of what's going on all over the world hits home for those of us who are living in New York City or in the New York metropolitan area. He says, grief is change we didn't want. Atoning with that. Change we didn't want, coming at one with that. If the link, Bokshu very graciously went and found the link on YouTube and posted it in that email thread. I really advise you to look at this interview. It's very useful. I've been on Zoom all week long because I've had to teach all my classes, 4 classes right now on Zoom. I've been talking with colleagues and friends. It seems this is the way we're going to sort of buffalo through what's ahead of us. And you know, that seat of the pants kind of energy right now can be useful. It's challenging, but it's very useful for us in staying flexible. And we need to stay flexible during this time. It also, I teach television production, so it's also an interesting proof of McLuhan's statement that the medium is the message, because right now my students are making their documentaries, they're making their films with Zoom and their phones. And it's very useful work. So it's interesting to see how things will change, because they will change drastically by the time there's a handle on all of this. And we need to adapt. It's also been wonderful sitting on Zoom with the Zendo in the mornings. And I find that it's very useful to maintain this kind of connection with everyone. I'm very thankful to everyone in the Village Zendo who organized the online Zendo and who keep the website up to date in this time of change. It's so important for the Sangha to have a means of expression. And right now, here we are. So living with the coronavirus is really showing us just how connected we are. And so, of course, in the absence of a vaccine or effective treatment to protect us, we've all, or we should be, maintaining social distancing and self-quarantine if we've traveled someplace new, or if we think that we may have been exposed to, or if we've tested positive for COVID-19. It's the only way right now that we can flatten out the transmission curve. And as our Sangha member, Kyosei in Milan, right, this morning in the same email chain, IO email chain, she sent us a video that's basically a musical version of this song that basically says, stay the fuck home. And it's a wonderful little ditty if you have a chance to listen to it. For some of us, we have the luxury of staying in a home or staying in an apartment. For others, they're on the front line. They're healthcare workers, delivery people, store workers, grocery, food clerks who have to keep things stocked. And for some, staying home is isolation, and for some, it's bedlam. My coworker said she was locked in the bedroom and her kids were scratching on the door like zombies. You know, she's really in the midst of it all. So I think, well, either way, sheltering in place only works if you have a place to shelter safely, and a place with food, running water, hopefully some way of communicating. And there are those among us who are sick, or who have family who are sick, and have to practice with life and death decisions moment by moment in painful isolation. And that in itself is the heart of practice. For those of us who have the opportunity or the relative privilege of social distancing, it can feel very isolating. We're distanced from our former activities, and our challenge is now to cobble together our lives in a different way, using new tools and strategies that keep us safe and keep others safe. We're in the woods right now trying to find new ways of engaging with our practice. We're all living with coronavirus. How do we respond? I've been thinking a lot about Henry David Thoreau. He's one of the early social distancers, you know, in Walden, a book that he published in 1854, he provides us with a really eloquent account of living alone in the woods near Walden Pond. For me, reading Walden when I was a junior in high school really changed my life. It opened the door to a deeper spiritual practice. And I remember sitting in the tiny backyard in Queens with under the clothesline with my father's t-shirts flapping in the wind over my head, just understanding how one could connect with a deeper self, a larger self, right where I was in this backyard. Or it wasn't always in the backyard. Sometimes it was just seated by an open window with a breeze coming by. And it led me to understand the value of solitude as liberation from the status quo. And that was big for me because what I'd felt before was real loneliness. Growing up a queer in an old world Italian family, in a very homophobic world. It drove home the value of living life deliberately and opened me up to the idea of listening to my own instinct. In the bedroom where I slept growing up, there's still this little framed quote that I made when I was in high school. And of course, you all probably have heard it before, but at the time for me, it was liberation. And I'm doing a little transposing here. If a woman does not keep pace with her companions, perhaps she hears a different drummer. Let her step to the music which she hears, however measured or far away. It's so important. It's so important for us right now to take this time of solitude, not just to fret, perhaps to allow ourselves to be open to grief, but also to continue to connect with ourselves, a deeper connection, and especially in light of our practice, to truly understand that the self has a little bit more depth than we may have originally thought. So, you know, the idea that Thoreau was this master of solitude, this kind of odd duck loner living in the woods, is a bit of a misperception, because scholars have gone back and they really found, through reading his journals and other materials, they found that rather than being a hermit who cared little for others, he was really busy during the time he was on Walden Pond. He was writing petitions to help his neighbors. He was attentive to what was going on in the community. He was involved in the Underground Railroad, a system of passage to help people get out of the bondage of slavery that was still allowed in America at that time. In fact, when he was on Walden Pond, he wrote Civil Disobedience, which was a really important, a seminal essay that would go on to inform the thinking of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. In Civil Disobedience, he argues that citizens have a right to disobey a rule of law if it goes against their inner sense of what is just. He draws on his own experiences and explains why he went to jail for not paying taxes, because he refused to participate in the oppression enacted by his government in the form of slavery and in the aggression of the Mexican War. We see his influence in the salt marches that Gandhi organized in India to protest the British monopoly on salt. And we see it here in Montgomery, Alabama, where African Americans boycotted a bus system that treated them like second-class citizens. So the fruits of Thoreau's solitude provided a nonviolent method for people engaged in social change. And that's an important fruit of solitude. Yet everyone who participated in these various actions heard their own drummer. They were coming to it from wherever they were. We're living in a really scary time. They were too. They still are. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what action to take. And I find a koan that really useful in these times is case 16 from the Mumonkan, where Unman says to the monks, "Look, the world is vast and wide. Why do you put on your 7-piece robe at the sound of the bell?" Now, Unman was a very important figure in Chinese, in our Zen lineage, Chinese Zen lineage. He lived in the, between the 9th and the 10th century. And it was a time of great upheaval in China. The Tang dynasty was crumbling. And different regions of China were in great unrest. And so young men would join these monasteries basically to escape the chaos of poverty and political upheaval. And in the monasteries, they would find shelter and food and structure to their life. But Unman is looking at them and saying, "Hey, why do you put on your robes when the bell rings?" The world is vast and wide. There's no fixity. There's no isolated self, just constant flow, and within the flow, why do you practice wherever you are? If we're all threads in the same robe, how do you respond? What kind of skillful intervention can you make where you are, where you find yourself? In the 1980s, I became an AIDS activist because my friends were dying. We were all terrified and feeling abandoned by our leadership. It would take 6 long years, 6 years, not 6 weeks, 6 years for Ronald Reagan to say the word AIDS. It felt like we were living in a different reality. It wasn't so much a bell that was ringing, but it was a blaring alarm that was going off and petrifying, in petrifying ways. Originally, I started practicing as a volunteer at Gay Men's Health Crisis, which had organized one of the first responses. And what was the response? It was basically a hotline so that people could find out what, if they had the disease, what to do if someone they loved had it. Or there was a buddy system where volunteers would go and bring food and sit with people who were so discriminated against that they were being chased. A friend, one of the guys who hired me at GMHC had been chased out of a store because he had facial KS lesions. So these buddies provided such an important lifeline. And after time, when there still wasn't effective treatment, many people gave up the more pastoral side of providing services at GMHC and formed a civil disobedience group called ACT UP to advocate forcefully, but non-violently, for social change. I remember, because I was working at GMHC, I remember walking down the hallway and seeing a sign on one of the doors that said meditation. And I didn't know it at the time, but on the other side of that door was Enkyo Roshi and Robert Genjin Savage, who were teaching beginning instruction and meditation to the clients of Gay Men's Health Crisis. And Roshi, being a video maker, actually videotaped his beginning instruction. And I hope you'll bear with me right now because I'm going to ask Bokashu to just play this clip of Robert Genjin Savage, who was at that time dealing with his own illness, how he approached practicing in a time of fear and isolation. So you can play that whenever you're ready.
At some stage in Zen practice, almost everyone comes up against fear. And there are all sorts of ways of talking about it. For instance, you can say that our greatest fear is death. And that's because it's the loss of self. And we're all afraid of losing ourself. We hold on to our self. Well, the interesting thing about Buddhism is that one of its most important teachings is that the self is an illusion. It's an illusion that we create with our minds. So, from that point of view, the fear of death, the fear of losing the self, the fear of losing control, is based on an illusion that we create moment after moment. So by learning to work with that, by first of all really becoming aware of it deep in ourselves, seeing how we create it, it enables us to accept it and forgive it. I never really expanded on how, for me, the way to become one with a really challenging emotion like fear, or really severe pain, or something else like that I'm going through. For me, it's constantly forgiving it. It's almost as though I sort of imagine it being out there and saying, well, it's okay. I forgive you. I forgive, and I keep saying that again and again. It's another way of letting go. But for me, it's a way that works on a very emotional level, because otherwise I have a tendency to want to push it away and say, no, no, no. Especially when push comes to shove and you're in some kind of a crisis, there's this, automatic no, 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 that you sort of fall into. If you make an effort to open up to it in a way that makes sense to you, then you can counteract that. For me, it's this idea of forgiving. It also allows you to be gentle at a time when you tend to tense up and fight and aggravate the condition. And with fear, we tend to tense up, pull away.
What Genjin says in this piece that to me is so moving is he talks about the fear of practicing when he's in pain. He talks about forgiving that fear. And he's very careful, though, to say that that's his method. He's not basically saying that's what you all need to do. He's talking about all of us right now in our fear, pain, isolation, of finding a way to become at one with it, whether it's forgiveness, acknowledgement, or just a deep breath into what we're feeling. That's vital right now. There's so many ways for all of us to respond to this bell. People have come to Zen for all kinds of personal reasons. I came because I was really depressed after so many friends had died. But after a while practicing, the personal drops. You realize that suffering is universal. It's the first noble truth. We're not alone in our suffering. It's part of being human. That's part of putting on our robes at the sound of the bell, is acknowledging that life is suffering. And practicing with that makes us more porous, more able to respond to what is, more compassionate when things don't go right. Nothing's going right now. The world is spinning sort of off of its axis. What's the compassionate response? Tuned in, we can start to take right action. We can offer what we can in these times. And like Thoreau, maybe this period of social distancing can be very productive. There are many possibilities. We can raise money for causes or friends in need. We can organize civil disobedience. Even under isolation, what might that look like? We can make calls for RAP because seniors are right now being locked up in prison. They're in danger. And if they came out and safely isolated for 14 weeks, or for 14 days rather, would not be a harm for anyone. We could pick up groceries and leave them for someone in need. We can make phone calls to people who are isolated. Those of us who have paid taxes in the past might be getting a check. And we can ask ourselves, do we need that check to keep our heads above water? Is there other ways we could spread that around to help others who are really struggling to keep their heads above water right now economically? In a time of epic crisis, as we find ourselves in right now, it's more important than ever to join in our Sangha, to think of that vast robe, and to figure out, or let it just drop, what do we need to do when the bell rings? But in listening to Genjin's words here, I can't help but think of someone who is trying to breathe with their chest tightening, you know, how to deal moment by moment with that type of challenge. You know, he was dealing with the physical pain of having advanced HIV. Each moment, breathing into it, becoming one with it, forgiving it. That was his practice. I can listen to that now. I can tell you years ago, the idea of forgiving anything was alien to me. I worked on motivation of anger. Anger got us out in the street. Anger motivated us to do die-ins, to throw our loved ones' ashes over the White House fence, to take all of these really bold actions. But it didn't protect us when, you know, the impact of all of these deaths, it's almost like a wartime experience. All of these deaths hit home. That suffering for me is what opened me up to Zen practice. And I hope opening up for all of us also involves the compassionate response. And that's what I wanted to leave you all with today, is just take this time, try and keep up with your practice, and come up with what your bell sounds like and what the response is.